Welcome everybody to this career advancement series session. And thank you so much for Dr. Nkrumah-Elie. I hope I didn't butcher that.
Pretty close, yeah.
Okay. And to share her experience to us. And she was a former postdoc at CU Anschutz before she moved on to her current position. And right now she's the director of R&D at ChromaDex. And without further ado, please take it away. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. So if you're going to go ahead and record, I give you permission to do that now. As a disclaimer, anything that I state is my personal opinion and does not reflect ChromaDex or its shareholders or board of directors. So learning from my mistakes, a difficult transition from academia to industry. As Wyatt introduced me, I am Dr. Yasmeen Nkrumah-Elie, and I'm going to tell you my story, hoping that all of you will be able to glean some beneficial information from it and hopefully have an easier transition if you are choosing to go to industry. So how did I get here? This cute little baby is me. Started off just very wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, not quite sure exactly what I wanted to do, but eventually led me into wanting to study engineering. So I went to the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University and studied biological and agricultural engineering. But I did not love engineering. So my mother sent me to one of our ancestral homes of Ghana, West Africa, to figure out what exactly I wanted to do next. So while I was there, I studied under a shaman or a medicine man, traditional medicine, as well as under a chief, just learning about different aspects of leadership and how I could truly make an impact in the world. There, the shaman, he told me he was not able to cure cars, which at first truly confused me because I was like, but you're into medicine and not mechanics, so I'm not quite sure where this is going. But eventually, what it translated to was that he was not actually able to help people who were developing diseases related to industrialization and environmental pollution. So this got me very excited about wanting to learn more about the area of toxicology. So when I came back to the States, I went back to the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University and studied toxicology in the College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Well, during that time, I had a little fun. I got married, I had 2 babies. And so my husband and I, and he was also doing his PhD as well, were trying to figure out where we were going to go. And my PhD dissertation was involved in looking at 3 different garlic compounds and how they actually influenced or inhibited the initiation of breast carcinogenesis. So I was excited about nutrition. I was excited about environmental health. I wanted to go back to Africa and fix everything related to industrialization and started applying for positions. My husband was doing the same, and we couldn't find anything in the same location. He actually was at University of Central Florida, so we weren't even in the same city doing our PhDs, but yet had 2 babies. You can do the math. And so we decided to start applying for positions together. And I said the last place I would end up would be Oregon. Well, I ended up in Oregon at Oregon State University as a postdoc. My husband was there as well and was studying the combination between environmental toxicology and nutrition. And so for the research that I was conducting there, I was introduced to metabolomics. And I utilized it for preclinical and clinical model analysis of dietary zinc deficiency, as well as arsenic exposure. After my close to 2 years at Oregon State, unfortunately, my mother got sick, and Colorado is my original home. And so I was determined that I needed to return home to be able to help her as quickly as possible. I didn't really have all of my ducks in a row. And so I said very quickly, let me just kind of work through my network, and was able to contact Nicole Reisdorf, who at the time was at National Jewish Health. And hey, and we were able to connect, and she helped me land a postdoc within her lab, which eventually moved over to the Anschutz medical campus. So things were going really well. I was studying clinical metabolomics, but I knew probably around the first 6 months that I did not want to stay in academia. but I didn't really have an exit plan. I didn't have a strategy, but I wanted to finish particular projects. And in my mind, I said, well, once this is done, then I will start to think about this a little bit more. I was taking lots of the different classes through the BEST program, was getting a lot of advice, was taking some of Bruce Mant's workshops, but didn't have a real serious plan as to what I was really going to do next. So then, unfortunately, as it happens in academia, there were budget cuts. There was a grant that was lost by the Reisdorf Lab, and that meant that some of us had to be relieved. Well, I was the first to go because, one, I had been there a shorter period of time than others. And then two, I was dealing with the fact that I didn't really want to be in academia. And so my mentor didn't really have a strategy for helping prepare me for that space because she had not been in industry. So unfortunately, I landed in unemployment, and that put me into just not the best space. So in my mind, I was like, hey, I'm great. I got a PhD. Wouldn't it be just great if somebody would give me a chance? And thought these things were actually going to come really, really easy. But as I quickly learned, that was not exactly how it would happen for me. So I went, and my self-esteem dropped low, 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 like we hear in those commercials, because I just assumed, I put something on LinkedIn saying I'm available, everyone was going to run to me. And that was not at all true. To kind of deal with my depression, but also to help my son, I became a volunteer teacher's assistant. I one day just told his teacher, I said, I'm coming in for the next 30 days to assist you all day. I didn't give her the option, but it really actually helped me to focus and start to learn a little bit more about my why, and to see that I actually had something to give back. One of the challenges I feel like with a lot of postdocs and even graduate students is that you feel like you're at the bottom of the barrel, and you don't always recognize that you're at the top 1% to 2% of the world in terms of how much knowledge that you've actually achieved. And so I had to remember that I actually had something to give back. I also had my own business that I had established a few years before. Now, my business was great in that I had a lot of activities, but I didn't necessarily always garnish wages from my business that I probably should have, and very often gave workshops for free versus actually charging. So as an entrepreneur, I had to venture out a little bit further. So I was doing some aspects of teaching financial literacy, and then I became a consultant, being able to help with business market plans and being able to utilize certain aspects of science to help individuals who are developing products that may have not known the same kind of science that I knew. That wasn't bringing quite enough money in either because I really didn't know how to charge, right? So then as a child, I was a dancer. So I started teaching dance at some of the different schools. And then even though I'm ashamed of it, I was doing DoorDash. I'm doing deliveries as well. And half the time I would wear a shirt that would say like, I have a PhD or something, because I wanted someone to say, oh, you have a PhD, let me hire you. It didn't happen. And in that period of time, I applied for over 300 positions, have them all written out, had to keep it documented for unemployment, and only had 3 interviews in 6 months. And somehow I was bombing all of this. So I had to just take a step back and figure out what was I doing wrong. Pretty much I was sending the same resume that was really just my CV to everybody. So that was wrong. I wasn't modifying the CV into a resume that was short enough that someone would actually really be interested in me. And my assumption was that I'm great. You're going to see it when you see my resume. Well, not everyone is looking for the quote unquote greatness that you see in the mirror. They might be looking for something a lot more specific. So I didn't get any of those positions that I interviewed for, and had to go ahead and do some soul searching. I checked out Cheeky Scientist, which I would recommend to all of you. Now, I will let you know, disclaimer, I never paid for it, but I took advantage of all their free content on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook. I was checking out everything and finally figured out that I needed to do something a little bit differently. So I started connecting with people in my network, because before, even though I had a great network, I wasn't connecting with them. People didn't know what was going on. And I wasn't calling people. I might send a LinkedIn message or email a resume without a great cover letter. And so it was kind of like no one knew what exactly to do with this. So when I picked up the phone and said, look, I'm looking for this, and I started to actually define what I wanted my future to be, that I wanted to be in the nutrition space, that I wanted to be able to help people, that I really wanted to be able to work in a space that wasn't in a lab, but that I would still be able to have great influence, then things started to actually change for me. Oh, wait, I'm going backwards. So then I started getting interviews and my self-esteem got better, had different positions, started getting offers as well. And then I landed as a position at ChromaDex with the ChromaDex External Research Program. So I'm going to bore you a little bit about what I do, and then we'll get back to more about your experience and how to help with that. So the ChromaDex External Research Program is actually really unique. And when I got involved, it was really what you would call a material transfer agreement situation. I won't even call it a program per se. In that people would contact ChromaDex, say that they were interested in some of our patented material, and then it was sent. But a lot of the research studies were not exactly focused on the business interest of the company. But we were doing this for great reasons. It was a great aspect of philanthropy before I got involved and even now. So very unique in being able to provide material for external investigators for free. Being able to provide the highest quality product because of our patents. There's very few people that actually have our product anywhere in the world, and they are limited in terms of what they can do with that. We were also able to provide technical support and expertise. So before I got involved, people would just send their applications or send their information and it would get sent without really evaluating their protocols and saying, how can we actually help you succeed with your research? Because we have the advantage of certain information that would increase your likelihood for success. We were able to build relationships with leading investigators, particularly in the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide space or NAD space, to help support their research, facilitate collaborations between investigators, as well as on our end, we were able to get early insights into research before it was published so that we would know what was going on and being able to plan two steps ahead. Another great aspect was that we are able to license the intellectual property based on our agreements from the investigators. Now, when I was doing my PhD and my postdocs, nobody talked to me really that much about intellectual property and what that looked like and how that was an additional source of income. I'm gonna bring that back up later. And then through this, because it wasn't actually ChromaDex that was doing the research, but independent third parties, we developed a greater sense of public trust for our products. So as a result, where we stand now is we have over 220 material transfer agreements at 168 institutions in 32 countries. Just yesterday at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was on a conference call. It gets real. But it has resulted in 65 peer-reviewed publications, which includes 11 clinical studies, and for a dietary supplement, that's pretty much unheard of. As well as 70% of the nicotinamide riboside studies that are on clinicaltrials.com, or clinicaltrials.gov rather, are utilizing our product. So in 2019, we received several awards, including the best of the industry ingredient supplier from Nutritional Outlook. So our program is pretty fantastic. And what was able to help me do was utilize my passion for nutrition, utilize my passion for helping people, which includes the investigators that utilize our products, as well as working with like our marketing team and our scientific affairs team and regulatory affairs team. So I was really excited to be able to jump into this position. Okay, so now let's get back what you came for. My lessons in life. Hey, Bernie. All right, so this is where you start taking notes. Mistakes on my journey. So first of all, when my position was ended, my vibration went really low and my energy became unattractive. And so who wants to help someone who is depressed and seems like they don't really know what they want to do, and who's also very angry? So I had to change that fairly quickly. I also couldn't really see my value. I didn't have a plan and I didn't see what my worth was. So applying for jobs at KFC wasn't really demonstrating that I was valuing myself that high. As I stated earlier, I sent out the same resume over and over. And they say if you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, then maybe you're a little insane. I also applied for positions that only required a bachelor's degree, and even a couple that only required a high school diploma, but yet I still had my PhD on my resume. So quick story, my husband, also PhD, also was at the Anschutz campus. He and I did a little bit of an experiment. We both applied to a particular company for a particular position, and he removed the PhD off of his resume, and I kept mine on. Well, he was able to get interviews and actually got an offer from that particular company where no one even contacted me. And part of the reason why was because this particular position only required a BS. So to entertain someone with a PhD that didn't have experience in industry, you're coming in at an entry level and you're very expensive. I've learned this now. So why would I hire a PhD who I might have to pay 2 to 3 times higher if I can hire a bachelor's degree who can learn and do the same thing? So I had to learn about that fairly quickly. And even though I thought it was unfair, I now understand. I had built a network, but I didn't leverage my network. So I had 5,000 followers on Facebook, 2,000 connections on LinkedIn, but I wasn't really telling people what it was that I needed and that I wanted. And I didn't tell them what my goals were or even ask advice as to how to get there. So once I had to humble myself and say, you know what? You don't know everything. There's a lot to learn and you need to use your network because no man or woman is an island. And once I started leveraging that network, reaching out, calling people, asking them questions, I started to learn a lot more about how industry was working and a little bit more about myself. And because I didn't have a vision at the time, I was kind of desperate for anything. And so when you tell people that, well, whatever you got, I'll take. I just need to be able to pay my bills, especially when you're coming out with a PhD, people aren't really looking for someone who's desperate. They want someone who's actually going to be able to transform and build their company. So when I finally got hired, it was really interesting. So I had applied for a senior manager position and got hired as a project coordinator. And I didn't really know, just because I didn't know that much about industry, the power of titles. And so even though I thought I was going to be a senior manager and they changed it to project coordinator, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But what I realized was that the project coordinator was an entry-level position and actually, based on the company standards, only required a bachelor's degree, which meant that I was also getting a lower salary. So that was pretty frustrating. And the human resources team didn't really tell me much about that. But we had a new person who came in and said, you know what, things actually need to change for you. So I became a manager in 1 month, a senior manager within 3 months, and the director of R&D within 6 months, because I had to prove myself, but also because I was unaware that I should have kept that senior manager title, and that would have gotten me paid a lot more from the beginning. So now let's go ahead and give you some advice for your journey, and then we will have some time for questions at the end. Hoping that because of the mistakes that I made, that it will be helpful to you in overcoming some of these challenges. So I recommend, even if you're at the first month of your postdoc, that you are starting to develop your exit strategy, that you want to know more about, or that you want to define rather, your lifestyle. How much money do you want to make? If you have student loans, take that into account. If you have a family, being able to take that into account. Do you want a position where there is upward mobility? Are titles important to you? How is work-life integration important to you? How do you want your time to be spent? And location, does it matter where you are? Now we're dealing with fun stuff with COVID and being socially isolated, but location is still really important. What type of impact do you want to have? Do you need to be the type of person that feels like you're having a direct impact on consumers or customers? Are you fine with being indirect? Do you want to work for a large company? Do you want to have a particular niche within a company? Then you want to start to look at industry and types of companies, small companies versus larger companies, startups versus well-established publicly traded companies. I recommend that everyone write down their vision. This is where I want to be. I now like vision boards, but if that's not your thing, just kind of write out what your strategy is. Where do you want to be when you leave your postdoc? Where do you want to be 3 years after you leave your postdoc? I had heard the title of Chief Scientific Officer, but had no clue what that really meant. And then I met the Chief Scientific Officer of the company I'm with, and I said, you know what? I can do that job. So now for me, my vision within 5 to 10 years is to become a Chief Scientific Officer of a nutritional or otherwise company related to science. So now I have a vision, a plan, and a strategy, and it may even include me going back to school. Also develop a timeline. So for me, I was very focused on wanting to finish projects, and that's great. I don't recommend that anybody leave anything behind if they can help it, but sometimes with postdocs, and probably more often than you realize, there's a lot of loose strings. But if you actually have developed a timeline, then you're giving yourself a little bit of pressure to make sure that you become more time focused and that you're actually working on your time management skills, which is a really good strategy for industry as well. And then share your vision and your goals. Tell others what you want to do. Get information for them. Ask them to talk to their networks about who you are and what you want to do. So it's truly beneficial. So within that, you want to build your network. You want to create your dream team of different individuals. You don't want to just be seen, but be known. You want to be able to take different paths to leadership, which may be leading an organization or like Wyatt hosting an event here today, asking questions and being able to make an impact so that people remember you. I think it's really important to have mentors and coaches, and mentors in various aspects of your life. You can have mentors that are related to some of your personal interests, as well as your scientific or engineering interests, people that have already paved the way for others and might be near retirement. And then also having mentors and individuals that are fairly new in their positions so that you have different aspects and different points of view. It's also really important to have sponsors. And I didn't know exactly what a sponsor was other than paying some money to help somebody every once in a while. But a sponsor is someone who is going to speak about you behind closed doors, sometimes without you even asking. And for many companies, it is that sponsor going to help you get an interview that's going to help you get a job. So for me, once I started developing sponsors, inside people at different companies that would speak positively about me, that would pass my resume so that it would go to the top, then things started to change for me and I started to get those interviews. And I think accountability partners are great. Others that are on the same path that you are, that can communicate with you, that you guys can hold each other accountable, that you can look at deadlines that can support you, and that really become part of your cheerleading team. And I recommend that you're always thinking 1 to 3 years ahead. I know that's hard, especially now when we're just now starting to get started and we're focused so heavily on the research that's in front of us. But being able to say, what am I going to do 1 year from now? And what do I need to do today so that I reach my goals for 1 month? What do I need to do this month so that I reach my goals for this year? And being able to constantly put yourself in that space. And that involves your network as well. Who do I need to start meeting and interacting with and building true relationships with so that way I am pushing forward and being able to get into those positions when I need to. And have your goals in mind. They're allowed to change, and that's perfectly fine. But if you have your goals in mind of where you want to be, then you'll start to get steps closer to that versus where I was, where I didn't really have a goal in mind. I just wanted to get a job, and KFC wasn't hiring, or at least not me. Another important aspect when you're starting to look at your job is to figure out who you are and what type of person you want to be in a company. Do you want to be a thought leader? Meaning, do you want to be the type of person that is influencing change and ideas, or do you want to be a worker bee? And both are fine. My husband is the worker bee type. He loves bench work. And even though I really like being at the bench, I'm an ideation type of person. And so as I did the disc and I did several other different personality types, everything pointed towards me being a thought leader, to being an influencer, to being strategic, more so than me really being in the lab. So I had to recognize I probably won't find great satisfaction long-term if I'm working at a bench. And so being able to look at different types of positions where I could have influence became greater and more important for me. So then comes the idea of what type of company do you want to work for? Startups and small companies versus large corporations. Now, this is all based on my experience for the past few years. There's a lot of excitement with startups. Whew, we have an idea, we're innovative, we're excited about this. There may be great potential and also great risk. Where some larger companies are really already established, there's still some excitement about new products and new ideas, but there's usually less risk involved with those different companies, especially when you start to look at long-term security. At some small companies, training, everyone gets initial training, of course, but it may be a little bit more limited, whereas some of these smaller startup companies, they need you to hit the ground running versus needing somebody to really be able to train you. Larger companies, there often will be a lot more training that will be set in place. It might even be 6 weeks to 6 months of training before they're allowing you to really fly. And with some of the larger companies, you might even get what are considered cross-functional rotations, which means that you may start in one particular area and you have that focus. But if you ask for additional training or additional experience in other areas, that you may be afforded such benefits. And not so much within the small startups, just because usually there isn't the bandwidth or the resources. With everyone, all these different companies, there should be a sense of internal professional development and mentorship. But again, with smaller companies and smaller numbers of individuals who are doing what you do or something similar, that mentorship and that professional development may be a little bit more limited. Inward or upward inward mobility. So within a company, being able to look at where can I go 1 to 3 years from now? Where can I go 5 years from now? Within smaller companies, that often can happen faster, at least from my experience. And sometimes you can even negotiate those titles. I'm so surprised when I look at people that finished their postdocs and then started off as a vice president, or even as their own chief scientific advisor or officer within those companies. And so sometimes with the less established, you might have an opportunity to have some of these greater titles, whereas with larger companies, there may be more directed movement forward that you need to pay attention to that could take a little bit longer. Influence is another big area with larger companies. Particularly when you're first starting out, your level of influence may not be as strong. Whereas with startups and smaller companies, your influence may be great. Salary is another interesting space. So startups and small companies, for some of them, you might not get a single dollar, especially if you're one of the founders. So you're living off of your own savings and investment. If they've hired you after they've started, to get some venture capital and other things, then your salary might not be as high, but there may be great other potential. There may be other great benefits such as stocks, vacation time, flex time. Whereas with larger corporations, they're already established, their salaries are a little bit more stable and fixed. So you may be able to earn more money with a larger company. Stability is another area. With some of the smaller companies, particularly if they're at the very beginning stage in that startup phase, stability can become a question. Is our idea actually going to work? Will we be able to take this to market? Or will we get bought out by someone and then I might actually lose my job? Whereas with larger companies, tends to be a little bit more stability. For both smaller and larger companies, you can ask about publications. Publications get into a really interesting space as it pertains to intellectual property. So trade secrets obviously aren't going to be sold, but for some companies, they're actually trying to become more scientifically astute. They want people to actually know the name, so they may be a little bit more excited about publications. And then also with large corporations, everyone wants to have a scientific record. So I know someone had told me, you'll never publish again once you're in industry. Well, yesterday a paper just published that I'm a co-author on. So there are those possibilities. And then resources. So resources are human resources, resources are money. And with smaller companies, you might not be able to do everything that you thought you could do in industry. At least I couldn't. I came in saying, okay, I want a $3 million budget, literally, for the ChromaDex external research program. And everyone kind of looked at me and laughed. And they said, here is your budget. And I was like, wait, that's not even a tenth of what I asked for. And so recognizing that those resources were limited, whereas larger companies may have extra funds that you might be able to venture off a little bit more with for your projects and your research. And then, do you care about how well known this is? So if you say that I came from Abbott or I came from Abcam or some of these larger companies, it helps as you start to develop your career and start to move around, people being a lot more familiar with those companies, whereas some smaller companies sometimes aren't quite as well known. Another thing that I learned very quickly was that many positions are already filled when you apply for them. So if you see them on LinkedIn and other places like that, they usually already have, or not usually, very often, already have someone in mind for those particular positions. And so that gets frustrating when you're applying for it. Also learned that they are external versus internal job descriptions. So what you see on the outside may not actually be what they're looking for on the inside. And usually they are a lot more vague when they're advertising to the general public versus internally know very specifically what they want. And that's where networking comes into great play. So the position that I have now, I actually started talking and sending my resume and interviewing for the position even before it was advertised. And that's where the importance of sponsors comes in once again, because I had someone on the inside that said, hey, Yasmeen is awesome, check her out. This position isn't even being advertised yet, but we want her on our team. And so having someone on the inside that was speaking about me, even when I didn't know it, helped me to land the position that I had, as well as receive offers from some other companies. So when you're doing your job search, most of the time you're going to look down and say, okay, this doesn't say jumping from postdoc to industry position. There's going to be other keywords that you want us to start to look for. So scientific affairs is a great one, dealing with a lot of the science of a particular company and being able to translate that to marketing teams and working with the public. Medical affairs, another type of space. And so many of us who've done the biological sciences, even like bioengineering, these are great areas for us. Medical writing is another area that people can take advantage of if you love to write. If you don't love to write, don't apply for medical writing positions, because as it states, it's a lot of writing. It's a lot of translating the medical information. Medical science liaisons are individuals who work with companies, typically when a product is in like its phase 2, phase 3 studies, to speak to different investigators, to speak to different KOLs, which is a key opinion leader. Those are doctors that other doctors listen to, and telling them about these new particular drugs or products. Senior and lead scientist. Don't be afraid of assistant director or director positions, depending on the size of the company and how well established it is. You can come in as a director, believe it or not, particularly in the areas of like innovation and R&D, technology, global strategic alliances, product development. You can be a specific study director, which may be very specific for a particular study. Get your feet in and be able to move around a little bit further. Project managers. So all of us have had to manage a project from our PhD to even within your postdoc. So all of the different aspects of it, really you actually have some skills as it relates to project management. Being a research coordinator, consultant, being able to go into working for a consulting firm. We know how to do research, and that's usually what a consultant is involved with. Research analyst, regulatory affairs, particularly those who have a background in toxicology. You can even be a visiting scientist for some companies, where it's kind of like a nice glorified word for internship for somebody who's a little bit more established. There are postdoctoral fellowships in industry, a little harder to find, but if you ask about them, you can find out a little bit more about some of the temporary positions, being able to use that temporary word. Technical application scientists, even some of the different engineering positions. So when you're starting to look for where you want to go, start to pay attention and don't be afraid by some of those titles. Know that you have a whole slew of transferable skills. Project management, being able to work with a team, having time management, being goal-oriented and saying, okay, I have this grant that is due and it's a hard deadline. Well, that's dealing with time management because you probably are still trying to do research at the same time and still execute other activities. So project management is something you may be familiar with and just don't even know. Communication skills, which are important in industry. Your publications are demonstrating that you can communicate science, that you've given presentations, to various audiences. Take advantage of these opportunities to be a communicator. And even science communication is taking challenging science and defining it in such a way that a general audience can learn more about it. I literally was doing that earlier today. Cross-functional team leadership. This is where you've worked with a statistician, you've worked with a clinician, you've worked with some other stakeholders, and you're all working on the same project towards the same end. So that's cross-functional leadership. Being an idea person and generating different types of ideas, doing analytics. I'm pretty sure all of us have had to analyze some sort of data. Being very specific about subject knowledge, so having that niche. All of us are lifelong learners, otherwise we wouldn't be picking up another journal article to read. But also you want to be able to say that you are trainable, because possibly, and for many of us, our postdoc work and our PhD work was very different and we had to learn whole new skills. So these are transferable skills for you. Being self-motivated, I don't know any PhDs who are not self-motivated because you had to finish, right? And results-oriented, that you're able to multitask and do project prioritization. So being able to have your project, maybe that's funded, maybe that's not quite funded. You're also working on another project. You might be helping some grad students, being able to do a lot at the same time. But also being flexible, resilient, and resourceful through it all. So as you are looking at your skill set, and I'm bringing up project management again, just because I keep seeing it come back full circle for everyone. Learning more about project management. There's some courses on Coursera. I think there's like iTunes University, some other places, even in LinkedIn, where you can just take a basic class and get a certificate for basic project management. Not necessarily a certified project manager, whole different story. I recommend people having an entrepreneurial mindset and at least having business basics. So understanding marketing, understanding how the market actually works, what clients would actually want. You can start a sole proprietorship, you can get involved with a network marketing company, even starting your own consulting company. But understanding some of the basics for business really can help. So at one point in time, I was involved with a network marketing company, and I was actually kind of embarrassed about it when I didn't, when people asked me about it. I didn't share it in my scientific circle. But when I finally put it on my resume, people were impressed by that because I actually was able to talk more about business. And then I was like, oh yeah, and I have my own consulting firm. So that was pretty amazing. Being involved in leadership and mentoring, whether that's formal or informal, and mentoring not only from the side of you mentoring others, but also being mentored and having different leadership positions that are on your resume. Science communication, these are things that you can do now. Blogs, you can start your own blog, you can write for the postdoc type newsletters, being on social media, taking particular articles and just translating them into the general public language. YouTube and podcasts, whether you host it or you're serving as a guest, but being able to demonstrate that you can take something really challenging and break it down for the basic person. And that's important in business because you're going to be working with people that are in marketing or that maybe even on the social media side that aren't really familiar with a lot of the language and the terminology, but still need to understand the true science. And it's super important to have an online presence in LinkedIn. Bruce gives a wonderful, amazing workshop. If you haven't taken it, please do. LinkedIn helps so much. And for those people who don't put a lot of time and energy into it, it can become a stumbling block for you. So definitely want to have a great presence on LinkedIn. Read. I know we read a lot of journal articles, but you want to read on personal development, professional development, what that actually looks like for you and where you want to go. Understand trade organizations and what they are for the type of industry that you actually want to go into and some of those different publications that they have. Look at articles for the companies that you're interested in on LinkedIn. Follow those companies and pay attention and even share that out to others or put comments within their posts, and subscribe to different newsletters for different companies and different organizations. Also, being good at stats and programming is huge right now. Technical writing. So we do know that we technically write when we are writing articles, but that can look very different in industry. That could be creating manuals. That could be translating certain science into something that's for the general public. So technical writing is pretty broad. Learning more about tech transfer and intellectual property is huge too. And you might be disappointed like I was, but like, dang it, I could have taken advantage of a patent somewhere along the way. As well as understanding regulatory basics for the industry that you're interested in. Regulatory science as it looks in the United States, but even globally, which can be very different. So let's talk about resumes. You want to have a general resume as a foundation. If someone says, send me your resume, but it's not about anything in particular, that's that resume. But for every job that you're applying for, you want to adjust your resume for that position. You want to highlight 3 to 5 specific areas that job that you're applying for is also highlighting. You want to use their language. It's not really plagiarism. Use their language and validate what you're stating in these qualifications in the rest of your resume. 2 pages. 2 pages. My CV was like 9. Get it down to 2 pages. You don't need to put your publications in there. You can put a link if you really, really feel like it, but it's an accomplishment. And it's results oriented. Number of publications and presentations versus listing them. Being able to take that resume and say, these are the results of the action that I did. Nobody cares that you can pipette. I think someone said you can teach a monkey to pipette, but nobody cares, right? Nobody cares that you know how to run a centrifuge. They might care if you know how to run an HPLC, but some of the basics isn't as important. So you want to be able to say, was able to identify 10 biomarkers in this particular, disease state utilizing this technology. As a result, published 3 different papers and presented at 2 international conferences. You're showing that you have an end in mind versus just that you have certain skills and techniques. And pay attention to your job titles. This is something I learned from Cheeky Scientist. A graduate research assistant does not count in industry. What does that count for in industry? What does that position actually look like? Well, that's a scientist. So changing your title from graduate research assistant to scientist. A postdoc is a senior scientist or a lead scientist within a laboratory, or may even be a project manager. So being able to adjust that. And then as you're looking at the job description, what experience do they want? Can you transfer the title that they have based on your title? So graduate assistant, they need someone who has 4 years of experience as a scientist. Now you got it. So some different resources that I recommend for you. Book by Shelley Archambault. It's called Unapologetically Ambitious. And it's really her memoir, but she gives some really amazing and great information for anyone in any aspect of their career. Her area is business. However, she became the first Black woman CEO of a tech company and has a whole set of chapters that really can help you with your career. I've mentioned Cheeky Scientist again. Disclaimer, didn't pay for it. I only used their free resources, but it truly helped. I don't know if the BEST program is still running. Oh no, Bruce is saying no. Oh, it was truly helpful to me, and hopefully we can help get funding again so that you guys can learn more about some different experiences, because we recognize that 1 in 9, 1 in 10, PhDs and postdocs actually stay in academia. So that means there's a great need for others to be able to look at other avenues. And then Coursera. Coursera is great. It's been a wonderful resource for me to be able to take a class. It might be a 9-hour class that you can knock out on a weekend to learn more information to be able to add that to your resume. All right. Well, this is the end of my official talk. So here's my contact information, and I'm open for questions.
Right. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask, or you can type in the chat room. I can read out the questions for you guys.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Well, I guess I'll start while we're waiting. So one question is, you mentioned you had there was a time where you were desperate for looking for any type of job, right?
Yes.
But you also mentioned that people shouldn't be doing that. So how do you hide that? I'm really looking for just about everything, but when I'm going for an interview, I'm not presenting myself like that.
So you want to be able to apply for positions that will help your career and to be able to define that. So if you know that you want to get your foot in the door, but not necessarily seem desperate, then you want to do the research about the company such that you can indicate how that particular position is going to help advance your career. And so it doesn't seem like, well, I just want to get in the door. You're saying, well, I actually want to start at this position because this will help set the foundation for me to get into this next position or to get to my ultimate goal. Does that make sense?
I have a question. I really appreciated your talk as a PhD student who's interested in going into industry. So you mentioned that you did a brief academic postdoc, and I kind of hear conflicting information on whether it's like worth it to do an academic postdoc if you intend to go industry or not. And I was wondering what your take on that was.
Okay. So I actually did 2 academic postdocs. And I just changed the name of the second when it was like, yes, senior research scientist. So, there's some good and bad for both of them. I think the good for it was that I actually gained experience that I didn't have with my PhD that made me more marketable. So with the position that I have now, there's a lot of metabolomics research that is conducted, and I didn't have any experience in that area prior to my postdocs. So it gave me certain levels of experience. I also didn't exactly know what I wanted to do after my PhD or how I was going to make an impact on the world. And so having those postdocs kind of gave me that buffer time to learn a little bit more and also learn about myself. On the other side, you still may be coming in at what would be, quote unquote, an entry type level for different positions. And so for some companies, they want you to have experience and have a PhD. And that can be really frustrating if you go straight from your PhD into industry, or at least that you're trying to apply. If you haven't demonstrated that you can do something else other than just your PhD work. At the same time, there are certain avenues that you can actually go when you start networking with different people and saying, okay, I would like to do an intern as a PhD. I know I asked about that and it was frowned upon by my particular advisor, but that is a way that you can actually kind of get your foot into the door with industry. And so you want to do whatever you can, and every single position is different. Every single company is different. But to ask as many people as you can, like, I want to enter industry right after my PhD. How do I make this happen? I have a dear friend who we did our PhDs together, and it took him about a year after his PhD before he actually landed a job. And for him, he said what his mistakes was that he didn't know how to translate his skill set at the time so that it was more marketable. And he actually went into the regulatory science area because he had a background in toxicology and said, oh, okay, I know a lot about regulations. I know about health. I know about safety. And being able to translate PhD toxicology into product safety for him was the key way to go. So I say, weigh your pros and cons, and know that even when you come in, you still will have training wherever you go, at whatever level you go into, and just network like crazy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
There's a question in the chat room. So from Jocelyn. So excellent talk. And what is your take on the number of publications and whether they are important for getting a job in industry? Thanks.
So publications show that you can finish something. I haven't seen where having 20 publications helps you get a job any easier. you want to be able to demonstrate that you can complete the work, that you can complete the task. But it doesn't weigh that heavily, which is why they're not even really on your resume. You can kind of have a link to PubMed where it lists all your resumes or, you know, some of the different resources, but it doesn't weigh that strongly. I'd say if you have 4 or 5 publications, that's great. I mean, for me, even though I have, I think 10 or 12 now, I'm only first author on 2.
Hey, Dr. Yasmeen, I have a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned certificates like through like Coursera or, you know, online programs. How much does that factor into, you know, the decision making, you know, especially if it's more on the business end where you're more, where you have more of the technical attributes? How much does that weigh in?
As I've evaluated different candidates, it kind of weighs in different spaces. So when I've interviewed for like our quality assurance and quality control team, wanting to make sure that individuals have at least a general understanding. So quality assurance is kind of making sure your product is good before it goes to market. Quality control is making sure it's good as it leaves the door. And so just having some of that basic knowledge has helped. For me, I think when we interviewed people a few weeks ago for a particular position, that actually was strong. Like someone had project management in that area, that weighed strong in my positive opinion of them. And it also showed that they were a lifelong learner and they were interested in learning outside of the framework of what they received in their formal education. So it's going to be different for everybody. And you don't necessarily need to have a ton of Coursera courses, but having some business foundational basics lets me know that you're more on the thinker side than the worker bee side.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Right. Another question from Sabrina. How do you reach to people on LinkedIn that you are technically not connected to, besides using the premium version? I've tried reaching out direct messaging and people just ignored me.
So this is where business comes in. Okay. So you're going to get, you know, they say 9 no's before you get 1 yes. And that was something that you kind of learn, and that some people are just going to ignore you, and you'll have, you know, people that will say yes. Having that second degree is nice because you can say, can you introduce me to so-and-so? You can reach out to someone, you say, oh, I know that you also are connected to this person. I would like to meet them and talk to them. Can you initiate an introduction? And I know I've done it probably about 5 or 6 different times. A couple of times I've been like, yeah, I'm friends with them or connected with them on LinkedIn. I really don't know them, but you know, we'll see what we can do. Another way is to actually, you know, go into that detective mode and start to Google and see if you can find somebody's email address online. Sometimes you can find it. It's a lot easier to find ones in academia than it is in industry, but being able to kind of connect with people in that way.
All right, I'm just building right now. So while I build and while I test,
Yeah, so I mean, while you're building, connect with different people, you know, that you actually do know. So exhaust your own personal circles, and then start to ask people to introduce you to other people. And if you see a particular company that you're interested in, find ways to connect. So one way that you can connect with people is if there's a post on LinkedIn about something within that company, comment below, and then even comment on someone else's comment, start to have a little bit of communication that way, and then send them a connection request after that. And so that they've already see you, they know what your name is, and you can even put on there, you know, do you mind if we connect, you know, right there on that post, and then being able to connect with them like that. Hopefully that answered your question a little bit more.
Just a quick follow-up on that question. Do you still, you know, right now we're in COVID, so we can't go to like conferences and stuff. So there's no, you know, physical connection there. So do you feel like networking online on social media is easier than physical connection? Like I meet you in a conference or something like that?
You know, it kind of depends. So if you're an introvert, probably. If you're an extrovert, it's driving you crazy. And so in some aspects it is, because you have a lot of different people. So this year I participated in the American Society for Nutrition conference. And I had 7,000 people that came to my talk, which was overwhelming in my mind, because we got like 1,000 questions back that we were trying to respond back to. So in that sense, I was able to connect with people, but I don't remember most of those names of the people that asked questions. We just kind of were responding. Versus at a conference in person, we're seeing each other, we're actually talking, we're exchanging information, and excuse me, someone's leaving an impact on me that I would want to respond back to. So it can be a little bit challenging, but being in a social space or a virtual space, you have more people at your fingertips, literally. And so now you have the option of reaching out to more people, but then also it's more likely that people won't respond back to you versus in a conversation. If you go up and ask a question, most of the time someone will actually respond back to you.
All right, there's one more question from Miriam. Thank you so much, Yasmeen. And here's the question. How close to graduating should you start applying for jobs?
Who knows when they're actually graduating? That's so sweet. Like when you're working on your PhD and your postdoc, you're like, when will I actually graduate? I'd say start networking about 1 to 2 years before you think you're going to graduate. Start applying for positions 6 months to a year. So if you're interested in going into government is slow. And so you want to probably do at least a year, unless they say that they're hiring for a position that's going to start right away, just because it might even be a whole fiscal budget year later before they actually hire people. Funny story there. I had applied for a position with FDA in 2017. And in 2019, I finally got a letter from them indicating that they had hired somebody. So government can be really slow. In industry, however, again, that networking is really important from the beginning, because then you can talk to people on the inside and say, when are you actually hiring for this particular position? Because it might be right away. It might be one of those positions that's already filled, but they have to legally advertise it. Or it might be something that they're just trying to get fillers out there to see what's kind of going on, who's in the market, start building up the network for particular positions. So when I got hired, and even for a couple of the other companies that I was interviewing for at the time, it was about a 3-month turnaround. For a lot of companies, they'll ask you when you're actually going to be available to start the position, and that can be a factor with you getting hired. So you can ask them as well, well, when do you need somebody to start? And if it's right away and it's 6 months out, that's a challenge. But if it's 2 months, then you probably can negotiate your start time.
I had a quick question. So I'm still in graduate school right now, but I think the head of R&D does sound like an attractive position maybe for me down the line. How is the work-life balance for that kind of position? I know you touched a little bit on it, having a conference at like 1 a.m, or a call on 1 a.m, but how is that?
So it's not terrible. My company values your work-life balance and integration, as they call it. They're saying you can't really balance the two. It's integration. So it varies. There are some weeks where I'm working 60 hours per week, and there are some weeks where I'm working 35 hours per week. I have a counterpart. So I'm the director of R&D for external research, and then we have another director of R&D for internal research. And he comes to work at 8:30 every day. He leaves at 4:30 every day. And so it really just depends on how big your team is as well, how much of the responsibility you're delegating versus how much you're actually having to do. And so for some of those smaller companies, your team might only be 4 to 5 people. Whereas a larger company, you might have 40 to 50 people. So it really kind of just depends on the particular company. And that's a really good question to ask when you're doing your interview.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Good talk too.
All right, so it's 101 now. So there's just one more question, Yasmeen, if you don't mind.
Okay.
This is from Carmen. How to handle having a clinical degree when applying to scientist jobs? I'm a veterinarian PhD, and it intimidates hiring folks when applying to scientist job. Again,
this is where you want to be networking with people so that you are interviewing and applying for positions that are very specific for what you're doing. So yeah, it can definitely be intimidating, but it's also really needed. And so then you're saying, okay, well, which types of companies would my skill set benefit the most? And so it might be in veterinary nutrition. It might be in a very specific area. And so medical affairs is a great place to be able to look at because you have that clinical background. And so medical science liaison, that would be a great position for you. Being able to also look at particular companies that might be able to just help you get your foot in the door. And so if you have a very specific interest, but you're having a really hard time, then I would say you might want to look towards a company that is more open to veterinarian science, to vet science, and being able to say, okay, I might have to go in and do some lab work initially to prove myself, or I might even be the director of veterinary services for this particular company that is utilizing animals to get my foot into the door and then move into a position that's a little bit more along the lines of what you want to do. But again, this is where your network is important, talking to people that know who you are and know what you can do so they can talk about you behind closed doors. Okay. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to email me. Everybody can connect with me on LinkedIn, and you guys can connect with all the people that I'm connected with. Get involved in the different organizations that you are in. Be seen and be heard in your process, and know that everyone's journey is a little bit different, but your journey is yours and it will help someone else along the way. So I thank you all for your time, and hopefully everyone got something good out of this talk.